The prison escape that led to America's largest manhunt, the impossible break. Before we dive in, don't forget, if you think this is just another prison escape story, think again. This one rewrote history, left the FBI baffled for decades, and still has people asking, did they drown in the bay, or did they walk free under our noses? Subscribe, like, and let's descend into the cold, dark waters of Alcatraz. June 12, 1962. The morning began like any other on the island they called the Rock. Guards patrolled the dimly lit tiers of Alcatraz Prison, their footsteps echoing against iron bars. Breakfast trays clattered in the mess hall. The air carried the faint smell of salt water and mildew from the San Francisco Bay. To most inmates, Alcatraz was a fortress where time stood still, a place where men aged, but walls never crumbled. But on this morning, something felt wrong. When guards reached cell 138, they saw Frank Morris's head resting peacefully on his pillow. The faint outline of his shoulders rose beneath the blanket. But when they tugged at the figure, the head rolled onto the floor. It wasn't Morris. It was a papier-mâché dummy, sculpted from soap, cement dust, and human hair stolen from the prison barbershop. The sleeping inmate was nothing but a decoy. Panic spread like wildfire. The cells of Clarence and John Anglin, two brothers from Florida, revealed the same trick. Dummies tucked neatly under the sheets, painted faces staring back at stunned guards. 3 of Alcatraz's most resourceful prisoners had slipped through the cracks of America's most secure penitentiary, a place once believed escape-proof. As sirens wailed, every guard on the island scrambled. Spotlights swept the cold waters. Patrol boats scoured the currents. But Morris and the Anglins had vanished, leaving behind a hole in the prison's very legend. The investigation quickly uncovered the elaborate scheme. Over months, the men had chipped away at the walls of their cells with stolen spoons and makeshift drills. They had widened tiny ventilation ducts, carefully hiding the holes with painted cardboard. At night, they would crawl into a hidden corridor behind the cells, climbing through a maze of pipes and ductwork that snaked upward toward the roof. No one noticed. But what truly stunned investigators was the raft. Made from over 50 raincoats stitched together with glue and thread, it was an invention as desperate as it was brilliant. Wooden paddles were carved from scrap materials, and life vests were fashioned with meticulous care. The evidence suggested that the men weren't just escaping, they were sailing off into the most dangerous waters on the West Coast. The San Francisco Bay was infamous for its icy temperatures and violent currents. To most, it was a death sentence. But Morris wasn't just any prisoner. He was a man known for his intelligence, his ability to manipulate systems, and his uncanny patience. The Anglin brothers had been raised swimming in the rivers of Florida. If anyone could fight the bay, it was them. By sunrise, the FBI and Coast Guard had launched one of the largest manhunts in American history. Helicopters circled the bay. Search boats dragged nets across the water. The world's eyes turned to Alcatraz, watching the story unfold with morbid fascination. The island that had once symbolized the government's iron grip now looked like a fortress breached. Were the men alive, drifting toward the Golden Gate Bridge? Had they drowned, swallowed by the merciless currents of the Pacific? Theories spread faster than facts. Some swore they saw footprints on Angel Island. Others claimed to spot a raft drifting under the bridge in the early morning fog. And then investigators found the first clue. A piece of the raincoat raft washed ashore, torn and battered, but unmistakably part of the escape plan. It raised more questions than it answered. Did the raft rip apart mid-journey, drowning the escapees, or had they abandoned it after reaching safety? The hunt was on. For the first time in American history, Alcatraz was no longer a symbol of order and control. It was the heart of a mystery that would haunt the FBI for decades. And when authorities followed a lead just days later, what they discovered left even the most hardened investigators questioning everything they thought they knew. The prison escape that led to America's largest manhunt, the hunt begins. By dawn on June 12, 1962, Alcatraz Island had become a hive of chaos. Searchlights pierced the fog, guards shouted across the tiers, and the warden's voice barked orders that echoed through the stone corridors. The prison that was supposed to be escape-proof now stood exposed as vulnerable, and that realization rippled all the way to Washington. The FBI was called in. The Coast Guard was mobilized. Even the U.S. Navy joined the search. What began as a prison breach exploded into a full-scale national manhunt. The first hours were frantic. Helicopters hovered above the bay, their rotors whipping up water as spotters scanned for floating bodies. Boats dragged the surface with hooks, hoping to snag debris or corpses. On the rocky shores of Angel Island, muddy footprints were found. Investigators crouched over them, flashlights flickering in the mist, debating whether they belonged to Morris or the Anglin brothers. But within hours, the tide had washed them away. The clues, like the men themselves, slipped through their fingers. J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, ordered a top-priority investigation. To the Bureau, the escape wasn't just about 3 fugitive lives. It was about credibility. Alcatraz was the government's showcase of ultimate control, a fortress where the worst of the worst disappeared forever. If these men had beaten the system, then the entire image of federal authority cracked wide open. Agents pieced together the escape plan from the cell block. Hidden tools, fake vents, and even a drill fashioned from a stolen vacuum motor. In the utility corridor, they found the men's work site, a dark, narrow crawl space caked in dust, where the trio had hidden for nights, chiseling away at concrete and waiting for their chance. In a storage area, they discovered the remains of the raft's construction, glue, raincoat scraps, and seams still sticky from adhesive. But the waters of San Francisco Bay remained the greatest mystery. Could 3 men really have survived the icy currents? The FBI leaned toward no. Their reports described the bay as treacherous and unforgiving, where hypothermia set in within minutes. They believed the men drowned, their bodies pulled out to sea by the currents that churned past the Golden Gate. But there was no proof. No bodies surfaced, no clothes, no bones, nothing. The silence of the bay only deepened the mystery. Public fascination, however, exploded. Newspapers splashed the story across front pages. The rock breached, an escape from Hell Island. Reporters speculated endlessly. Had the trio made it to shore, blending into the crowd in San Francisco? Were they living under new identities? Or were they lying at the bottom of the bay, skeletons tangled in seaweed? Whispers spread of sightings. A fisherman claimed he saw a raft drifting under the Golden Gate Bridge. A night watchman swore he spotted figures moving along Angel Island's beach. Families in San Francisco reported strangers knocking on doors late that night. None of the tips led to confirmation, but each one kept the sight. Ori, alive, each one made the possibility of survival harder to dismiss. And then came the photograph. Months after the escape, U.S. Marshals received a letter with a picture attached. The photo showed two men standing near a farm truck in Brazil, their features strikingly similar to Clarence and John Anglin. Was it real or a cruel hoax? Authorities studied it, but in the 1960s, forensic photo analysis was primitive. The mystery deepened. Behind closed doors, investigators argued. Some believed the men had drowned that very night. Others thought the escapees had help waiting on the outside, a getaway car, money, even contacts abroad. If the Anglins had reached Brazil, it meant the world's most infamous fugitives were living in plain sight, their secret protected for decades. The FBI pressed on, pouring resources into leads from California to South America. But every trail went cold. Every witness recanted or vanished. Every clue was inconclusive. By the end of 1979, the Bureau officially closed the case, declaring the men likely drowned. But not everyone was convinced. The U.S. Marshals refused to give up, keeping the case open, the files active, the manhunt alive. And then, just when investigators thought the trail had gone cold forever, a new lead emerged. A letter arrived in 2013, decades after the escape, addressed directly to the FBI. It read, "My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morris. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely." The letter shook everything. Was it real, a hoax, or the final confession of a dying fugitive? The prison escape that led to America's largest manhunt, the truth that never died. The letter that arrived in 2013 was like a ghost, rising from the depths of the San Francisco Bay. Written in shaky handwriting, it claimed to be from John Anglin, one of the brothers who had vanished half a century earlier. Yes, we all made it that night. Bull, barely, it read. The author went on to say that Frank Morris had died in 2008, Clarence Anglin 3 years later, and that John himself was battling cancer. He wanted medical help in exchange for revealing his location. For investigators, the letter was a bombshell. If real, it meant the escapees had not only survived the impossible, but had lived quietly in freedom for decades. If fake, it was just another cruel hoax, one of dozens that had plagued the case over the years. The FBI tested the paper, the ink, the handwriting. They analyzed DNA and fingerprints. Yet, the results came back inconclusive. Not enough evidence to prove it real. Not enough to prove it false. The timing of the letter wasn't the only thing keeping the mystery alive. Over the years, family members of the Anglin brothers hinted at contact. In the 1960s, their mother reportedly received flowers each Mother's Day, unsigned, delivered by strangers. At funerals of relatives, witnesses claimed to have seen two tall, unfamiliar men watching from a distance before vanishing. If the Anglins had drowned, who had left the flowers? Who had stood in the shadows? Investigators pored over new tips and theories. Some believed the escapees had fled to South America, blending into rural communities where American fugitives could disappear. That 1970s photograph from Brazil resurfaced again, this time analyzed with modern forensic tools. Experts concluded there was a high likelihood it was indeed the Anglin brothers. If true, the photo was proof that Alcatraz's most daring escape ended not in the bay, but in the jungles of Brazil. Others argued the men had help, possibly from relatives or sympathetic outsiders who had arranged boats and safe houses. One retired U.S. Marshal said bluntly, "These men had a plan and they pulled it off. Yet skeptics held firm. They pointed to the cold water, the ripped raft found near Angel Island, and the total lack of confirmed sightings in the United States. The bay had swallowed many before, why not Frank, Clarence, and John? But the most chilling thought wasn't whether they survived that night. It was whether they had lived among us for years, watching as their story turned into legend. Imagine sitting in a diner or walking past a stranger on a busy street, never realizing you'd just crossed paths with one of the most wanted men in American history. That possibility, investigators admitted, could never be ruled out. Today, the official FBI stance remains unchanged. The men likely drowned. The U.S. Marshals, however, still keep the case open, active even after 60 years. As late as 2018, they released age-progressed images of the escapees, showing what they might look like in their 80s. The manhunt, in some sense, has never ended. What makes this story endure is not just the daring escape, the ingenuity of the raincoat raft, or the audacity of chiseling through the very walls of Alcatraz. It's the silence that followed, the absence of bodies, the unanswered letters, the possibility that somewhere, hidden in plain sight, the men lived long, quiet lives, laughing at the fortress they outsmarted. The legend of the Alcatraz escape isn't just about breaking free from prison. It's about breaking free from the very idea of what's possible. And that's why the mystery haunts us still. Because the bay never gave back its dead. And because, in the shadows of history, sometimes the truth refuses to surface. They thought the rock was escape-proof. But maybe, just maybe, 3 men proved the world wrong. And if you thought this story was intense, you're not ready for what's coming next. Subscribe so you don't miss it, because the next story might just make you question everything you believe about crime, justice, and freedom.